All right, what's up, New York? How's it going? I'm Ross Facaturo bringing you guys the 56th episode of the Apples to Apples podcast. And to say it's been a little bit, been a minute, whatever the hell I open up half these episodes with, been a minute. That would be an underestimation to say because we're about a week away from this being an entire month since I've last done one of these. And in that span, we've only seen an American League pennant chase in the Bronx, a magic bus ride for the ages in Queens, a tale of two turmoil, football seasons of turmoil in East Rutherford, the start of a hockey season, the soon to be start of a basketball season. Hell, we even saw a WNBA team here in New York win its first title. And I think we know what the main focus is going to be in this one. Sure as hell ain't going to be the Liberty, with all due respect. Uh, we're going to talk some baseball because at the end of the day, this is a New York centered podcast. This city of New York is a baseball oriented sports town. And the past month that we've seen on two different baseball diamonds is borderline, the what memories are made of for a generation. And I don't think that's hyperbole. Now, obviously, the Met fan whose season did unfortunately end a little less than 24 hours of the time I'm recording this. That was a ride that we'll never forget. That we will never forget. And while it didn't result in bringing hardware back to Queens, or at least the hardware we so desire to hoist up at the end of October, it sure as hell was as fun of a ride as you'll see in Major League Baseball. All these gimmicks and rally cries that you've seen throughout the years, whether it be last year with Texas, you had Creed, hired by Creed. 2022, you had the Phillies dancing on their own. You had the Angels years ago, they had the Rally Monkey. 2019, the Nationals had Baby Shark. We had, you can't even, put a finger on one specifically. I mean, it was just like a rally cry on steroids, right? All the different characters and just the overall fun aspect of this team, both on and off the field. And we're going to get to the games in a little bit because my last episode was prior to the Atlanta series that wasn't even considered the postseason, which was a movie in and of itself. But we'll get to that. Just overall, looking at this Mets season, big picture, right? And I'm someone who looks at seasons regardless of expectations as when you're this far, don't take the chance of saying, well, you'll be back next year. This is the start of something special. This is only the beginning because you never know. There's no guarantees in sports. You don't need me to tell you that. And if you needed a reminder, go back 2 years ago on the ice, go look at the 2022 New York Rangers, right? The kid line coming back down 3-1 against the Penguins, coming back down 3-2 against Carolina, up 2-0 against Tampa. And it all came crashing down. But you know what? We look back at that year, we said there was something to build on with that team. And while they did make the postseason the following year, well, you know what happened in the first round against the New Jersey Devils. So turn back to 2024. This is kind of the magic carpet ride that, yes, you'll look back at and nothing will take away from this season being a success. This team, or this season, was undoubtedly a success of a year. Unless you're someone who looks at seasons as championship or bust, if you're not first, you're last type mentality, which in most cases I will agree to. I'm not going to sit here and tell you a team that's over underline in March was like a little over 80, that them coming within 2 games of the World Series, I'm not going to tell you that season was a failure. It was a bona fide success. All right. And even if they do not, God forbid, do not get back to this point again, there are times, I would say this is the first time to have genuine belief in the Steve Cohen era. And I guess that's revisionist history to say because there was a team that won 101 games less than 2 years ago. And an off season where we followed that up, where yes, we did lose Jacob DeGrom. You followed it up with Justin Verlander, looked like a lateral move, and I don't know how many people had them winning less than 80 games. So maybe it is revisionist history, but what I'll say is that 2022 team was riding off of a great start. And while they may have not crashed and burned towards the end, obviously we all know the story about the division wasn't good enough because that Atlanta team was hotter than ever. All right. And but what I saw in this 24 team was the opposite. It was the 0-5 to OMG, as Gary Cohen said on the call in the Atlanta series. It was being 11 games back in May or June, whatever it was, and then seeing the turnaround in June. Following up the year prior, you had the infamous June swoon trademarked, right? They didn't win a single series in June of 2023. Flip the calendar 1 year, June of 2024. It's the turning point in one of the most magical MLB seasons in modern history. And they rode the hot tides of that run. July was pretty damn good. August, it was August. Yeah, it was August. I think they had a little bit of a slip up. And then, yeah, they had that stretch out west. They had the Angels, Colorado. They came back for Oakland, and someone that was at the was it Miami or somebody, another bottom feeder. Uh, and they like went 6-6 in a 12-game stretch or something. It was mediocre and was a really a stretch where you could have you slammed your foot on the gas and got your season going even better. But then you had the dreaded San Diego, Arizona stretch where 2 months prior we're eyeing it up and saying this is their season right here, and they went would they go 5-2, I think, or they went 4-3. They took 2 or 3 against Arizona, and then they split with the Padres, so they went 4-3, and then the the glass half empty full fan that I was looking at that as a missed opportunity, not going 6-1 because Edwin Diaz blowing games, giving up a walk-off homer to Jackson Merrill and giving up a go-ahead grand slam to Corbin Carroll. And then September comes, and albeit a somewhat easy stretch for the first half, they went through a gauntlet head-on with the Phillies, the Braves, and the Brewers, which wound up being a pretty coincidental line of 3 teams, almost like a team of destiny. And when they won that last game against Milwaukee, what was originally scheduled to be game 162 of the year before Atlanta got hit by the rain and the hurricane, you know, that was kind of the breather of a stretch that really showed signs of another team of Mets past. The same old story we saw, the aforementioned 2022 when you saw Scherzer and Bassett and DeGrom not so much, but really that three-headed monster in that rotation blew it when they had that season, that division in the palm of their hands, and then San Diego, it all blew up. And it looked like we were going to see it again with Severino and Manaea and Quintana when they just didn't have it out in Milwaukee, or at least Severino in Atlanta. They didn't have it. We were going to say, holy shit, it's going to be another one of those years. And what happened was they took advantage of that Atlanta, moving that Atlanta series, and then that paved the way for where all the magic started. You had, well, how about that first Atlanta game? So that was all they needed was they needed the one win. How it all played out, you had unless one team got swept, it was the Mets and Braves going into the postseason. You had Arizona going home. You had Albies hit that 2-run homer early on in that game. You said, "Oh my God, here we go. We're gonna need a pivotal game 2." And in a spot where basically all the odds are in your favor, and you're looking at an Arizona team that pretty much knows their season's done, barring one of these 2 teams falling flat on their face, you're saying the Mets are going to be that team to do it. And yet you had that, what was it, the 7th inning, I think it was? You had like base hit after base hit, just moving the line. And then you followed it up. Brandon Nimmo, of all people, the MF for that, runs to first base on a walk, who's smiling on a pop-up to end a game off his own bat. That jolly old bastard pimps a 3-run homer to break that game open. And in typical Met fashion, you have the aforementioned Edwin Diaz, who made the season close in the first place, out in Arizona, out in San Diego, early on in the season in Miami. He comes in, he doesn't cover a first base on a grounder, then gives up the bases clear and double a Harris. You're saying, oh my God. And I don't mean Jose Iglesias. You're saying, oh my God, we had this game in the palm of our hands. And we let our $20 million closer take the postseason away from us. Gary! There it is. We let a postseason spot time and time again, every scare of blowing such a prime opportunity to get in. And here comes Diaz. Like I said, $20 million, just letting it slip once again. And then the man that he is, my girl, you hear everybody singing it in the seats when he comes up. MVP, MVP. A guy for the past 3 years, turn those thumbs around when his buddy Baez came over. His other buddy, Carlos Correa, Puerto Rico connections. He was with this team for about 2 weeks. The shortstop that wasn't, when he followed through, goes back to Minnesota with the back spasms or whatever. All this drama, all this shit with him in his 3 years with the Mets. The 341, I'm guilty of it too. First pitch swing and sends one right center field. And that right there, that one swing, and oh boy, how stuff changed in the coming weeks. But that swing right there immediately became, in my own opinion, and I'm sure I'm not the only one with this opinion, the biggest swing in New York Mets history. Takes them to the postseason. Diaz comes back out. There's a quote saying around. He said, "I'm getting those final 3 outs." There was another, there was some moves and odds to that, because he said this guy can't get 3 outs in the 8th, let alone you're gonna have him out there for, I'm pretty sure it was the top of the order, or it's pretty high up in the order. He wasn't facing 7, 8, 9 because he walked them the inning prior. And credit to him, gets to save. The Mets are on to the postseason for what I think is like the 10th or 11th time in franchise history. It's not a high number for a team that's been around since the 60s. But, it's just, that was just more fuel to the fire that already was this season. Lindor pimping the homer. Diaz coming back out, the dramatics with all of it. Never being able to make it easy. And this was a game where, like I said, Milwaukee was supposed to be the end of the year. The entire league was watching that game because those were the only, Atlanta wound up taking the other game because it meant nothing. Those are the only 2 games on TV. The only 2 games on TV. And I think everybody kind of got a taste of what, I guess Atlanta kind of sneaking in last second too, but really what the Mets were all about with that one game. They sneak in, they get Milwaukee, a team where that same week, they went from, like, I think it was Atlanta to Milwaukee. They had like no travel days in between. They did the old champagne shower and had to get on a flight from Milwaukee, which is no walk in the park from Atlanta. That was a team where a couple hours prior, there was still some a possibility of them having to go out to San Diego. So they couldn't even fly Severino, who took game 1. They didn't even know where to send him. All right. So they wind up going to Milwaukee. And this is kind of the pick your poison of either San Diego, who was undoubtedly the hottest team in the league at that point, or a Milwaukee team that just had had your number this season. Kickstart of the year, the aforementioned 0-5, 3 of those losses were the sweep to start the year off against Milwaukee. That first game, Hoskins and McNeil, we know too much about it. And now, you were supposed to cap the year off out in Milwaukee. You dropped the first 2 with, heavy implications on the line. You win the last one, Milwaukee having nothing to play for. And it's kind of a pick your poison spot. They go out to Milwaukee. Severino kind of questions of, a guy who, even despite his prime, the couple years of his prime out in the Bronx, was a stud, but he still never really had the feel of pitching in the postseason. You put the ball in his hand game 1, and he was pretty damn good. And then you had, similar to that Atlanta game, man, you just had that one inning where just the offense just gelled out of nowhere. They put like 5 runs together. I think it was the pretty, fourth or fifth inning, middle of the game, you just strung hit after hit after hit, and Milwaukee tried answering back a little bit, but that was all she wrote. And you go up game one, contrary to the wild card series when you were the team with the heavy with the heavy home field advantage 2 years ago, 101 wins, bringing a San Diego team where, albeit their lineup was loaded, we know how that was supposed to unfold, and it clearly didn't. So now here you come in, the team that needed a day once the season was legitimately over. You used every last day and some to sneak into the playoffs. You already set the tone. You go up 1-0. You're up pretty late in game two. In comes Phil Maton, and that's a name that we're one of few names on this year's squad that we're going to want to forget. He had his moments in the regular season, but he was Garbo in the postseason. In comes Phil Maton, just absolutely loses the game for him. I think it was Garrett Mitchell. Well, Churio was killed them all series. Then Garrett Mitchell was the dagger. They had no response. They go down in game two, and you're like, once again, oh my God, this is where the season is going to die. Typical Mets, same old Mets, oh well Mets. And I think that's kind of the notion of this season, why it was so special, why it was so different. Because we had seen glimpses of the same fates and turnouts for seasons and the heartbreak. All those signs were there. And yet they just kept avoiding it time after time after time. I didn't bring up another clutch Lindor homer earlier on in the month out in Toronto. They were 3 outs away from being no hit by a guy who was looking at his second blown no hitter in a 2-week stretch in Bowden Francis with Toronto. He works like a 3-2 count. I forgot what the at bat was like. He pimps it right field, ties the game. They go on a crazy run in the ninth. That's like another one of many examples to a team that, if this were years prior in Mets history, a team that would have just curled up and died and watched as the league laughed at the same old, goofy ass, embarrassing Mets. A joke everybody loves to laugh at, but this team felt different for whatever reason. They escape Atlanta with the one win they needed. Milwaukee, they go down. They're looking at Jose Butto, Jose Butto, another guy who had pretty solid stuff. A guy who was kind of lumped in the David Peterson, Tyler McGill crowd of, they're the long relievers. If all else fails, it's a wash of a game. We just need somebody to eat up innings. He was one of those go-to guys, and he had a pretty damn good regular season too. For whatever reason, he really didn't have it in the postseason, but he comes in, gives up back-to-back homers to Jake Bauers and Sal Frelick. Jake Bauers, of course, one of the many obscure Yankees of the past couple years. Lump him in with J.D. Davis and the Jahmai Joneses and Willie Calhouns of the world. All right, I don't know if you could still see me. All right. Jake Bauers being one of those many obscure Yankees through the recent years, Willie Calhouns and the Jahmai Joneses and J.D. Davises of the world. He was one of those. And then you got Sal Frelick, who in the initial Milwaukee series in the regular season crashed into the wall in a game that meant nothing to Milwaukee, and a lot of Brewer fans thought he was going to miss the postseason. Those were going to be the two sets of hands that ended your magic bus ride in the wild card series. But I talk about this season just feeling different because it just feels like, a team, a past Met team would have let the season just die right then and there. And they almost did. In comes the ninth inning. Devin Williams, one of the best, most electric relievers in the game. It's hard to find many that are better. I'd probably say Emmanuel Clase, but recency bias leads you to believe that Clase is really not on that level neither. Yankee fans could tell you a thing or two about him, but all in all, Devin Williams, one of the best relievers in ball, and his changeup, so much so, is so nasty. Got so much break on it. It's got a name. It's like the Airbender or something. Well, in comes two guys on. You got Lindor on first, worked a walk. I think Nimmo had like a ground ball get through the hole. And up comes Pete Alonso, about half an inning removed from dropping a pop up. What potentially could have been, because I don't think he was guaranteed an at bat in the inning. I may be wrong on that. But a half inning removed from dropping a pop up on the first base line, what I think at that time may have gone on to be what would have been his final play in the field as a New York Met, had the score stood. And the tail of the entire season with Pete was just, the power only came when it was a 10-run ball game, win or loss. It was when the game meant nothing, he was finding the seats. You know, as compared to if you got the bases loaded or second and third, nobody out. Even when you just need a sac fly at worst, he's swinging at sliders low and away. He's swinging at changeups 10 feet in front of the plate. A guy who, myself included, was valuing he's a lifelong Met. You ink him up for years, he's going to shatter every record, held by a New York Met hitter. Every record that Darryl Strawberry and Daniel Murphy and all these names and of Mets past currently possess, they're all going to be replaced by Pete Alonso if he's here for the far, the distant future. But it just got so bad time and time again. You just expected nothing out of the guy. He was a total zero when it mattered most, when there were feet on the bases. And leave it to this unpredictable joyride of a season. He takes that aforementioned airbender of a pitch, so nasty it's got its own nickname, and he takes it the other way. And there is only one person in the entire ballpark that could tell that Pete Alonso, with one swing of the bat, took the lead for the New York Mets, went from death to life, went from hopeless to hope, went from an extended series in Milwaukee, Wisconsin to 3 outs away from bringing postseason baseball back to New York, Queens to be specific. And they tack on an extra insurance run, Jesse Winker, a fan favorite out there in Milwaukee. But Pete Alonso, the second he went Apotaco, second it nicks off the bat, the only person in the entire ballpark that knows that ball's hitting the seats. And just, me speaking specifically, I was working in a store. I was closing a store. And I didn't know if I wanted to yell out the loudest, holy shit. And I didn't. I was just so frozen in disbelief. Disbelief that time and time and time and time again, a team, a franchise that normally quits when it faces adversity or put up or shut up type moments, they shut up. Man or mouse type moments, they're mouse. This team was different, and they showed it again. And I brought up before Lindor's homer earlier in the week in our regular season game. I said, I never seen anything like that. I think that was the Monday of that week. This was the Thursday because they didn't have a day in between. It took 3 days to have the most magical homer in New York Mets history be surpassed by another one. And they go out, they get the final 3 outs. The New York Mets, when they were on the doorstep of death, punched themselves a ticket to match up against a familiar foe, the Philadelphia Phillies, a battle of the Turnpike, North Jersey, South Jersey. We've known them all too well across all major sports here in this town. As the great Craig Carton once said, "Foo Philly." We had it a couple months prior with Knicks Sixers. You want to go back a couple years prior, you had Eagles Giants. We've had numerous Rangers Flyers series throughout the years. But yet, surprisingly, we've never had the Phillies and Mets meet in mid to late October. Or in October at all, for that matter, unless you got like that final game, 162, seeps into October 1st and 2nd. But the Mets and Phillies had never matched up in the postseason. Kind of hard to believe. I know with the format, for however long, it was only the division winners got into the postseason, and now we just recently added a 6th team, so maybe. But, you're looking at back-to-back years. You had the Phillies and Braves, right? How many times? You had the Giants, Dodgers a couple years ago. So we've seen a lot of division-on-division matchups, rivalry matchups. Cubs, Pirates a couple years ago, Cubs, Cardinals. First time ever seeing Mets Phillies. And, it was kind of surreal too because this is a Phillies team that, or at least their fan base, kind of shot down Brave fans that said they fell victim to the bye while it's supposed to serve as an advantage, being more so of a disadvantage, kind of a curse, kind of a, leaving the teams with the bye unprepared. If anything, it kind of is like the kiss of death on a season. And Philly fans like, no, that's a copium. They're coping. It's a cop out. And yet, it would take 4 games, just kind of to paint this big picture. 4 games. The Mets didn't even take them to Game 5. It almost happened. It almost happened. And when Diaz again, but Game 1 out in Philly, 2 pitches in, the return of Kodai Senga. We saw him for 5 1/3, 5 2/3, whatever it was. He misses the first half of the year with the shoulder fatigue, the arm fatigue. He gets that start in, the Friday night game against Atlanta. Place was rocking. It was like 6-0 at one point early on. He had the grand slam, Janie Martinez. He goes down with the calf strain. That's all she wrote on his year. He pitched 5 innings. He was done. He's kind of looked at as a non-factor on the season. Well, he comes back for Game 1 against Philly, and 2 pitches in, Kyle Schwarber takes him about like 420 feet, and you're like, oh shit, this is where it's all gonna end. But no. This is a Met team that once again, I think I've got to pull up the exact score. But a team that put up their runs late feasted on a bullpen that, if you look at that Philly bullpen, it's not, bozos top to bottom. They got Matt Strahm, Jeff Hoffman, Carlos Estevez they brought in at the deadline. The Mets just treated them like a T. They put up 5 in the 8th inning, down 1-0. And by the way, it was Zach Wheeler on the other mound. Wheeler was wheeling and dealing, no pun intended. I got it up right here. He went 7 innings, 9 Ks, 1 hit. I forgot who had the 1 hit, but it was like a single up the middle or something. They couldn't touch him. And then came, I think it was Jeff Hoffman was the, Hoffman got credited with the loss. Strom came in, wasn't much better. They added Tanner Banks at deadline. So this is not, a bullpen to take lightly. The Mets got to him. They went up 1-0. Second game, back and forth. The 7-6 final where the Phillies get their own comeback win. Severino felt like he went an inning too much, but was otherwise pretty damn good. He gave up back-to-back homers to Harper and Castellanos, bring Sally up, bring Sally down. In terms of Harper, had the place explode, and then Castellanos, my God, added fuel to the fire. And then the Mets answered back, and I believe it was Tyler McGill gave up a walk-off double down the left field line to Castellanos on an inside slider, a guy who early on in that game was getting booed for swinging at every pitch thrown his way, whether it be 10 feet over his head or past his legs. Not to mention Vientos had a 2-run homer, go-ahead homer. They were down, 6-5 going into the 9th. They gave up 3 in the bottom of the 8th, which was Diaz once again. Where have you heard that one before? McGill was coming in for the save because they couldn't help but take Diaz out by that point. He didn't even get to finish the 8th. And then Vientos hit the go-ahead 2-run homer, barely squeaked out. He actually had 2 homers on that night. I forgot he had the 2-run homer in the 3rd. And then it was Castellanos. It was just a Nick Castellanos game. But then we come back to Queens. I said winning that Milwaukee series guaranteed postseason baseball back in Flushing. You had Sean Manaea on the bump. OTC, I acknowledge you, my original tribal chief. That's a blow once again. There's not much to blow because they take a 7-2 final. Take it 7-2 score to the final. They go up 2-1. And they got Quintana on the bump, who's only statistically following as bad of a low point in the season, midway through like June, July, he was borderline unpitchable. Statistically had like one of the best ERAs for the final 2 months of the year. And I was actually at the Game 4 of the NLDS. And went with my father, and it was kind of, all these stories you hear of me being a WFAN listener, all these callers that are, pushing 50, 60, 70, older callers, hell, even people, the middle-aged men or anybody for that matter, but people call in and they have memories and stories of going to the ball games with with their father, with their parents. Um, for me, it was my first ever postseason game. My father's as well, and the way that game panned out, an otherwise snooze fest for about the first 5 innings, a 1-0 score, 1-0 lead held by Philly on an error on a tough play, tough grounder for Vientos to play. Philly's got a run in. It's kind of frustrating too for the Mets because through 2 innings, they left the maximum on base. They left 6 guys on base. I think the first inning it was bases loaded, 1 out. Second inning, not so bad, bases loaded, 2 outs. It was like the fifth inning, they left 2 guys on again. I was like, oh my God, it's going to be the same old tale. This is going to be where the magic stops. The Bucks got to stop somewhere. Francisco Lindor comes up, bases loaded once again in the sixth, and everybody's singing "My Girl." They got sunshine. Was I don't even know the lyrics. Was it "I got sunshine on a cloudy day" or something? Regardless, the whole place is singing. They start chanting MVP. It's a scene. And then Carlos Estevez on the mound. I brought him up. He's the deadline ad. Fastball in the zone, drives it right center field. I'm looking at the gap. I'm saying, just get down, get some runs in. And it clears the fence, and the pandemonium, the explosion, the pop. It was like something I'd never seen before. I felt like I was in. I said I've never done shrooms or I've never been high or I've never done no drugs. But I said that has got to be a similar damn feeling to what it's like to be quote unquote on cloud nine, because I felt like I was floating, man. That the pop in our section alone, but just overall the pop, because all these events, the Lindor homer in Atlanta, the Pete 3-run homer in Milwaukee, the key word in all this is in, and then a city somewhere else in the nation or somewhere else on the continent, even lumping Toronto in there. But we hadn't had many of them in our own park. Hell, we hadn't really gotten to see the team in general for about the better part of half a month, just because of the schedule conflicts and the seating. And people were making the trip down to Philly because it had been so long. And you had the dominant first win in game 3, making game 4 a win, and you're in the NLCS. And Lindor with the high drive to right field, his second career postseason grand slam, the first one being statistically the loudest crowd pop in MLB history. I think it was 2017 with the Indians against the Yankees. He followed up his second one ever. The Phillies had no answer. They put up a little bit of a drive. Ninth inning, bases loaded, nobody out. I'm pretty sure it was nobody out. Diaz came in through 15 pitches, 12 balls, 3 strikes. People in the section, you get paid $20 million effing dollars to throw 5-pitch walks. They're saying, we got to get behind our guy, man. Get behind Diaz. They said, this guy is going to find a way to screw it up again, and we're going to get robbed of the Lindor moment. He gets the 2 outs. Up comes Kyle Schwarber. I think Marsh was the batter before him. I said, I'd rather him throw him at something hittable. Hopefully he gets out. He gets I said March. I think Marsh was the hitter prior. I said I'd rather just throw him something hittable. Hope he rolls over it, get the double play. Because if Schwarber comes up, I'm not messing around. I said Schwarber's going to send this 450 feet into the New York night. And Diaz, a guy known for his velo, but suspiciously low for the better part of the entire season, whether it be cautionary with the injury, whatever it may have been. The velo was down for the better part of the season. And he blows 101 past Schwarber, the fastest pitch he threw all season. Struck him out. Diaz doesn't want to jump because of the injury. I don't blame him. He does like this weird ass flex celebration, and that's all she wrote for the Phillies. They go dancing on their own at Cancun. Mets just erupt out of the dugout, and it's an absolute scene. The fireworks popping in the sky. You got the big screen NLCS bound, the graphic ready to go. It was nuts. I should mention, yeah, guys like Winker. Winker had a homer of his own in Game 3. He was like the life of the party. He was smoking a couple cigars. They showed him on that. Man, I saw Nimmo was in tears, borderline tears, which I thought was a little much. But I said, you know what? Honestly, he's been in this organization so long. Maybe it does mean that much to him. Maybe it did mean that much to him. Manaya, and that's something else. He got the Nimmos and the Alonzos who've been with this organization for years upon years. But I think too, it's the guys like Winker and Manaya and Severino and Quintana, Taylor and Iglesias and Martinez and Bader. The guys who willingly, I guess Winker wouldn't willingly come here, but he couldn't have embraced it better for the villain arc he had here the past couple years with the waving of the crowd. But everybody else, and I'll throw him in too because I thought he was a great story. All these guys that willingly want to be a part of this team. We heard Yamamoto didn't want to be here because who the hell would want to be part of such a mess that was the New York Mets, right? The same offer that he got with the Dodgers, same offer on the table here in Queens, and he avoided us like the plague, and you couldn't blame him, honestly, at that point in time. Because the Dodgers were, listen, they're the gold standard. I'm not even saying that because they just won the pennant. They've been the gold standard. Even despite recent lack of playoff success, they've been the golden standard of how to run a team. They inked up Otani a couple months prior to that. You could say he was how borderline locked to go there too. The whole thing close to Japan and all that. But regardless, they know what they're doing. They brought in Yamamoto. That's kind of too that I think there's a reason why Cohen, outwardly said, I want to be the East Coast version of the Los Angeles Dodgers. But we were a total recluse back then. And for all the guys like Shawmanae and Iglesias and JD Martinez, say what you want about Martinez. I know the last couple months were rough, but this run does not happen without him, with the players only meeting, outwardly basically saying, hey, this team's so bad. Why are we playing with any expectations? We have no pressure. Nobody expects anything out of us. Just go play loose baseball. Go play, like the days of you playing in the sandlot when you were a little kid. Because nobody expects anything out of us. He said that outwardly, and then he was a big voice in the room for that player only meeting. Jose Iglesias, Martinez Iglesias were teammates a couple times throughout the years. I know they were together in Detroit. I think they were with Boston together too. Jose Iglesias, we have fun with all the characters, but I think there was a legitimate bond they had over OMG, a legitimate, like that was the front and center, the rally cry that brought the clubhouse together as a whole. A guy at 34, I talk about Vientos before, and Iglesias too is another one. Vientos and Iglesias, two of the most pivotal members of this season in two completely different ways, were originally beat out from their spots by Brett Beatty and Joey Wendell. And it's incredible to think about, man. That's all he's ever going to do in the majors. Let's be blunt about it. And Wendell was just a total waste of time. Zach Short, that's another thing too. Not to get to it too early, but I'll just kind of get to it now real quick. I was not the biggest fan of the Stearns hire. I was not a fan whatsoever of the Carlos Mendoza hire. Those two men could not have proved me wrong any better this season. I'm going to start with David Stearns. David Stearns, a man who, yes, he had the brains in Milwaukee to turn him into kind of like one of these the money ball type approaches of not one of the biggest payrolls in the league, but you do more with less. You have a couple high caliber players here and there, but for the majority of your roster, it's just lower income players that kind of exceed their expectations for years. And I mean, they got an NLCS appearance out of that too. But I said, I don't know if that's going to add up in a New York market. Just because he did more with less, I don't know if he's going to be able to fully use up the money, Cohen puts on the table for him. And through year one, they kind of went the approach of, we're not going to expect to contend this year. And I think he was just as happy to be wrong about that as I was, saying, how weak minded and kind of at that point in time, I thought it was embarrassing all the money they had, and they were signing at the time, Jose Iglesias, who had been out of baseball, Luis Severino, who was getting booed off the mound every other start in the Bronx, right? Joey Wendell, and Joey Wendell wound up being a bomb. Zach Short wound up being a bomb. Adrian Hauser for the majority of the season wound up being a bomb. Michael Tonkin was such a bomb. He was off the team like a month in. He came. They traded him to Minnesota. He got waived. He came back to the Mets for like a week, and he got waived again. What I'm getting to is the thing I like the most about David Stearns this year was he was not afraid to cut bait with the dead weight. Last year, Billy Apple, we saw how many times were we screaming to see Daniel Vogelback at worst just be moved down in the order, but they were so stubborn about keeping him in the fifth, in the five hole, and just not removing him from the roster at all. Dream scenario, he would have been off the roster entirely, but he was batting right after the cleanup spot. Right? You go down the line, other guys we couldn't wait to see off the team that they never pulled the plug on. And David Stearns had no hesitation. If a guy wasn't producing, he was off the team. Mark Vientos, they righted wrongs early on with him. Myself included, I thought him and Beatty were hand in hand, and I could not have been more wrong. Vientos now holds the record for most RBIs in a single postseason by a Mets hitter. I just brought up this guy didn't have his job to Brett Beatty to start the season. Right? Joey Wendell barely survived a month. Zach Short spent more time with the Braves this year. I think I'm forgetting a couple guys. Jake Diekman's another one. He was not afraid to cut ties with the people who weren't producing, and that was such a refreshing thing to see, because it felt like once we got a guy, and despite results, whether they were good or not, we were stuck with him. And Carlos Mendoza too, man. I said this is a guy who everybody and their mother calls Aaron Boone a puppet, so we're gonna bring in the puppet sidekick. We're gonna bring the Robin to the puppet's Batman, and I could not have been more wrong about this guy. He, for whatever reason, I don't know if he was the cause for the loose clubhouse or just, the enjoyable experience of playing for this club. But the clubhouse, all signs pointed to them absolutely loving him as their skipper. I'm not saying they had, cold-blooded hatred for Buck Showalter, but maybe he truly was the old man yelling at the cloud and they needed a player's manager. I'm not saying Mickey Callaway was going to hold their hands up, when they go up to the plate, figuratively go up and hold their hands and not take the training wheels off. I'm not saying that's what Mendy is, because he's kind of a balance of both. He's not going to take bullshit, but he's not going to be the, the hard ass either. And kind of manager like La Russa basically buried the White Sox a couple years ago. Who knows if that would have been a similar trajectory with Buck? But Mendy probably going to win Manager of the Year unless they give it to give it to Pat Murphy of the Brewers. Postseason has no effect on it, so I'm not sure who's going to win it. But Mendy and Stearns could not have proved me more wrong this year, and I'm so happy to admit it. So happy to admit it. And there was players too. Severino was dead wrong about. I thought he was going to be an utter disaster. People even told me, they said it's a great move for the low risk that comes with it. Said, I don't know, man. This guy couldn't get past the second inning. As sad of a possible exit to his tenure in New York as you could draw up. I mean, a couple years ago, he was a baby bomber alongside Gary Sanchez and Aaron Judge. It's kind of sucks for him, too. The first year out of the Bronx for him is they're finally the time to get over the hump and win the AL pennant. But I'm already going a little too long with this episode, so we're going to save the Yankee talk for – they got a couple days before they start the World Series, so we'll do that a little later in the week. So I'm going to stay strictly with the Mets and kind of reminisce over this run. Luis Severino proved me entirely wrong. Sean Manaea, I wasn't totally against the move. I liked what I saw with him in Oakland, but his last couple years were rough. I kind of somewhat like the move compared to other moves. I can't sit here and tell you that I thought he'd be a borderline Cy Young candidate when it was all said and done. He talks about time and time again. He worked on his windup. He worked on his fundamentals, his mechanics, his stuff. He talks about a lot how he modeled his new windup off of Chris Sale, and it's pretty evident. A guy who had a pretty solid run in Oakland. And his last couple years, San Diego, he was a disaster. San Fran, forget about it. He was a reliever. He was a long reliever. And he comes here, and like I said, he's maybe a Cy Young candidate. It's a stretch, but he established himself as the bona fide ace of this year's team. Tyrone Taylor and Harrison Bader, I kind of look at as a 3A, 3B of that fourth outfielder. I remember when they said Harrison Bader was going to be the starting center fielder, they had him and Severino did joint introductory press conferences. They said they were going to eye up Bader as the starting center fielder. I let out a huge sigh. I said, "Man, Bader isn't the worst thing in the world, but that just feels like such a musty center fielder to have for this team." You know what I mean? And that's kind of similar thing too. He had that good run with the Yankees, but coming off being waived and spending a month with the Reds, it was like, well, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? And then you had Tyrone Taylor, who I wasn't really familiar with his game. No Shaq pun intended. I knew him pretty much as a fourth outfielder. I said, you know what? Maybe they saw something they liked with Stearns in Milwaukee. I said, all right. And they brought in Hauser too. Hauser wound up, I'd say, holding his ground for a little bit, but in the end, they wound up cutting ties with him. Then the big two for me, I brought up JD Martinez, Jose Iglesias. I guess the two quote unquote mercenaries of the team, but they added legitimate value to this team, man. Legitimate value. And while it might have dried up towards the end, I don't think their contributions to this team should go unnoticed. I'm trying to think of other people. Jose Quintana was on the team last year, but we barely got to see him. So this being his full New York Met, I guess you want to say, audition. He had his lows, but his highs kind of seemed to outnumber them towards the end. A couple relievers. I can't think of who did they. Diekman got cut loose middle of the year. Oh, Daniel Nunez. I don't even know if the guy came from anywhere. He kind of just emerged out of nowhere, and he kind of feels like the first product of the pitching lab David Stearns wanted to install when he took over. Um, Trying to think, Diaz, his season was rocky, but he can only go up for only go up from here for next season. I guess you just move along to the trade deadline when they brought in Jesse Winker. I brought up his reputation here was rocky. He waved to the fans in Cincinnati. He's overall his entire career he's kind of had that hothead mentality. Seattle, he was getting in a whole bunch of shit. Milwaukee, they can't stand him to this day. And I wanted him a couple years ago, similar to Manaea, but his tenure in Milwaukee was so bad, I was kind of out on him. Him and Manaea may have, well, not named Lindor, may have been probably my two favorite Mets in all this. And he's a guy I hope they really bring back. I know Manaea's got to take the player option. Winker is the free agent I really want back. Really want back. Because I don't think it's going to cost them a lot. I've said I want two of three of Santander, Peterson, and Teoscar Hernandez. And while I think Teoscar's going to stay, that leaves it to Jock and Santander. But I think you could get similar production out of Winker compared to Jock. So it's really for. I mean, listen, Soto's the dream scenario. But I don't think he's leaving New York. I don't think he's leaving the Yankees. But overall, I loved Winker here as a Met. A couple of the guys that brought the deadline, Stanek was great. It's kind of weird. Stanek and Maton kind of flipped production levels. Stanek was kind of a mess in the regular season where Maton was kind of reliable, and then they flipped roles. Maton couldn't get out of his own way postseason. Stanek was kind of probably their most reliable reliever out of any. Maybe Reed Garrett, who was a tale of two halves of the regular season, was absolutely shut down on many surprise in the first half, arguably the best reliever in the league at one point in time. And then second half, he didn't have it. He didn't have it. Peterson had a great year. McGill was whatever. Buto had a great regular season. And just the lineup, man. Alonso brought up didn't have it. One swing changed the outlook on his entire season, and rightfully so. Brandon Nimmo, he had that great run, but second half kind of tailed off a little bit. It's all going to boil down to Francisco Lindor. He had sunshine on a cloudy day. I looked it up. That is the right lyric. And a guy who started the year about like 3 for his first 25. I said, this is a guy who, yeah, I get he's a perennial slow starter, but I said, I've never seen anything like this, and I don't think he should be let off the hook for it. He shut me up. and you'll never hear me say a bad word about Francisco Lindor again. Never again. I died on the hill year after year, and I want to like Lindor. There's some people that I'll be out on early on. I said, you know, I would have no problem cutting ties with this guy. And no, they wouldn't have been able to cut ties with Lindor even if they wanted to. But Lindor just being the class act, the nice guy, just the role model he is off the field, specifically, but even on the field. I wanted to like Lindor, but he was making it hard for me to like him. It just felt like the tone he would set for regular season was irreparable for me sometimes. And this year felt like the worst of them all. And he shut me up one last final time. You'll never hear me say another bad word about him because of this year. The OMG, and you know what? Overall, I'm gonna miss it, man. I say it's always hard to say goodbye to a season, but this one just felt a little tougher to say goodbye to this time around. It felt a little harder to let go of, just because of I brought up. I don't think every team. And listen, I'm a advocate of if you get that far, I think expectations change, but I'm not gonna let falling short, falling 2 games of the World Series, 2 games within the world, 2 games from the World Series. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that season was a disappointment. And been dreading it for so long with the Dodgers series that came in. San Diego's got them down 2-1. They come back. They had like 33 scoreless innings in a row from their pitchers. Listen, they shut the Mets out games 1, 3, 4, and 6. And the Mets basically shut them out games 2 and 5. It was a tale of 6 blowouts. The Dodgers had 4, the Mets didn't. And the magic bus had to stop somewhere. And just overall, hell, we talked about the Mercenaries. We talked about the bridge deals, the guys who are here long term. We didn't talk about the future, to be honest. I guess you want to still consider Vientos part of the future. Alvarez, I'm not the biggest fan of, but I'm not going to let a negative opinion put a damper on the final minutes of what I feel like was the way to get back on track with this podcast. Just overall reminiscing over the season. Luis Angel Acuna, guy. I said this guy is looking like he looks like he's not tall enough to go on the kiddie rides at Disneyland. Looks like Altuve is probably a giant compared to him. I said I don't know, legitimately don't know if this guy's big enough to play the game. He's hitting moonshots left and right in the final month of the year. He was the extended roster spot. He proved to be clutch. I can't wait to see a little bit more of him next year. We got Mauricio back. And there's the guys. Listen, Pete Alonso, Severino, Minaya. Manaya's on the player option, but Quintana. I mean, Alonso, I think, is in a class of his own just because we've seen him for these many years. But just overall, maybe I'll do some off-season talking. And I'm going to do a Yankee episode too. I just want to reminisce over the Mets with this one, but it's a little bittersweet, and there's some hope, there's some bittersweetness, there's some joy, there's some excitement, but there's also some. It's really disappointing when you look at it as solely from the point of we will never see this team as a whole ever again. You say that every year when a season's over, you will never see that exact team again. And also, kind of to tack on a point I heard early on today, Evan Roberts brought up on Evan and Tiki WFA and Afternoons, brought up yesterday might have been the final day you'll ever see the New York Mets looked at as an underdog in a feel-good story. Because if Steve Cohen's plan does come into fruition finally, the 5-year window, and I got on him so many times, I said, how's this for a year 4 of a 5-year window? Nobody wants to come play for your team, and that might be someone I owe an apology to next. Steve Cohen, I couldn't stand the guy as an owner. I don't have a problem with him as a person, but I couldn't stand him as an owner for the longest time, and I feel like I'm getting cornered into a spot where I'm going to have to owe him an apology too, the three-headed monster of him, Stearns, and Mendoza. Steve Cohen's 5-year window, I said, how's this for a 4th year? Nobody wants to play for your godforsaken team. And I said, just overall, a team with no direction. A team just everybody avoids like the plague. I said, man, is this sorry? And that window is still open. There is still that fifth year to bring a title, a World Series to Queens in 5 years. There is still a possibility of bringing a World Series title to Queens in that 5 year window. This is year number 5. We got the old, we got the new, we got the returnees. And I think it's just overall, however the Cards play out in the offseason, it's once again fun to be a New York Met fan. And if Cohen's plan comes into fruition, I kind of brought this up a minute ago. While we may have probably seen the final days of the New York Mets being an underdog story, a feel-good story to wrap around, if Cohen's plan does come true, the New York Mets are now looked at as a powerhouse, a team with expectations, a team that's expected to be in the postseason, once the season gets going. While we may not have everybody on our side rallying around an OMG sign and a fat purple furry mascot from McDonald's and a Hawk Tuah girl and a little Chihuahua and a Seymour Wiener, a rally pimp, we may finally see the winning. And I mean the glorious last man. Like I said, nothing's ever a guarantee. I'm going to hope this is the start of something magical beyond just one feel-good story. And while this feel-good story truly was the word I just said, magical, something you couldn't write in a book, Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, Quentin Tarantino couldn't come up with this season. I'm hoping there's some more to it. And I'm hoping that these Mets weren't your father's Mets, weren't your grandfather's Mets. I'm hoping that this is the start of a new day for the New York Mets franchise. With that being said, I'm nearing up on an hour on this episode. It's good to be back on the mic. Got hockey underway, basketball soon to be underway, a Yankees World Series run that I'm going to get to in the coming days. We don't got to talk about the football. That being said, guys, I'm going to wrap this up here. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time on the Apples to Apples podcast. See you guys.